I sat down at the dinner table, eyes scanning the fine china, the candlelight reflecting off the polished mahogany surface, a celebration of 30 years of Titan Global, the company I built from nothing, the empire I created. I was proud of what I had accomplished. But right now, at this moment, something felt off. Something was about to happen, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Elena, my wife of 32 years, sat across from me. Her smile was still radiant, but there was something about her eyes, a coldness, a composure that didn't seem entirely real. She was hiding something. Beside her, Mark, my only son, the one I had always imagined would take over and continue building Titan, was staring intently at his phone, pretending not to notice me. Around us, the executives and board members chatted, oblivious to the storm brewing. I lifted my glass of red wine, my voice steady and deep. To Titan, to family, to everything we've built together. For a brief moment, there was applause, the sound of glasses clinking, and then silence, as though the calm before a storm. Elena cleared her throat. Before we celebrate, Robert, there's something the board needs to discuss. I frowned. Now? Her voice softened, but her words cut deep. It's about leadership and the future of Titan. Mark finally looked up from his phone, his face pale. Dad, you should hear her out. I laughed, trying to break the tension. You're serious? Elena, Titan is my life. What could possibly... She slid a thin folder across the table. Your resignation. My breath caught in my throat. Excuse me? It's already signed by the board, she continued. Unanimously. I turned to the faces around me, the men and women I'd mentored, promoted, trusted, and all I saw were lowered eyes. Elena, I said slowly, you can't be serious. You don't have the authority. Mark finally spoke, his voice shaking but rehearsed. We do, Dad. The trust clauses you put in place, they transfer control to the next generation in case of instability. The board thinks you've lost perspective. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was the precision of it. The very clauses I'd written to protect my family had become the weapon used to remove me. I looked at Elena. So, this was the plan. Our anniversary dinner, and this is how you serve the main course? Her eyes flickered for a brief moment, but quickly hardened again. You built Titan to last, Robert, but you forgot to build it to share. I chuckled, a bitter sound that made everyone flinch. You think you've won? Mark swallowed hard. It's not about winning. It's about survival. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the marble. Then survive. My voice was calm, almost gentle. But remember this dinner, because you'll wish you had never tasted victory. I turned and walked away without another word. The boardroom fell into an eerie silence. Elena reached for her wine, but her hand trembled slightly. Mark couldn't even look her in the eyes. Outside, rain started to fall. Slow, deliberate, like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. And the ending will shock you. I couldn't believe my eyes. There I was, sitting at the table, holding a piece of paper Elena had handed me, staring at my own signature, one I never signed. Everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed, was now in the hands of my wife and son. They had used everything I trusted to destroy me. I don't understand, I whispered, repeating the question I'd asked myself over and over. Elena, why would you do this? She didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was cold, but there was a certain confidence in her eyes I had never seen before. We had been married for over 30 years, but now I was looking at a stranger, someone who had changed, or perhaps someone I never truly knew. Robert, she said, her voice calm, as if we were talking about business, not family. This is what's best for the company, for the family. Mark and I have thought this through. You can't keep running Titan. You're no longer fit to lead. Those words were like a knife to my heart. This company wasn't just my job. It was my life. It was everything I had worked for, everything I had ever cared about. And now, here was my wife, the one person I trusted the most, telling me I wasn't worthy of it anymore. I turned to Mark, the son I had once believed would carry on my legacy. But instead of the respect and love I expected, all I saw was emptiness. He didn't look at me. He just stared at his phone, as if I were irrelevant. In that moment, I realized everything I had done, everything I had given to him, meant nothing. Not just the company, I was losing my family too. "Did you do this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "You too, Mark." He didn't answer. He just lowered his head. His gaze avoided mine. That cold indifference was enough to break me. The years of parenting, of teaching him, of providing him with every opportunity, all of it was in vain. I wasn't just losing the company, I was losing everything. I looked back at the paper. I could feel the deception in it. The words, the signatures. It was all carefully orchestrated, calculated. But it wasn't my signature. I never agreed to this. They had lied to me. And not just me. They had deceived everyone who had trusted me over the years. Elena looked at me. "So this is it," I said softly. "Our anniversary dinner, and this is how you serve the main course." Her eyes flickered for a moment, then steeled once again. "You built Titan to last, Robert, but you forgot to build it to share." I let out a bitter laugh, one that made everyone in the room flinch. "You think you've won?" Mark swallowed hard. "It's not about winning. It's about survival." I stood up. My chair scraped across the marble floor. "Then survive," I said calmly. "But remember this dinner, because you'll regret ever tasting victory." I turned and walked away without another word. The room fell into an eerie silence. Elena reached for her wine, but her hand trembled slightly. Mark couldn't even look her in the eyes. Outside, rain started to fall. Slow, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. I left. 6 months had passed since that dinner, the one that broke my life apart. I walked away, no longer a part of Titan, no longer a part of the family. They took it all from me, my company, my legacy, my son. And for a while, I allowed the silence to consume me. I didn't want to see their faces, hear their voices. The world I had built was now in their hands, and I had no place in it. But the world moves on. And Titan, it thrived. Elena, with Mark by her side, continued to run the company. I heard whispers of their success, how the stock prices soared, how they took Titan into new markets, how they brought in record profits. They were the new faces of Titan, the family I had built, and they were pretending like nothing had ever happened, pretending that I never existed. The first few months, I tried to forget about it. I thought about the years of hard work, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices I had made. I thought about how I had poured my soul into Titan, never for the glory, but for the people, for the company, for my family. And now, I was nothing, just a shadow in the past. But then something changed. I started receiving messages, cryptic, but clear enough to catch my attention. A briefcase left on my doorstep, a single document that showed Titan's financials, marked with red ink, indicating discrepancies. Another document, a list of employees who had mysteriously disappeared over the past year without explanation. Then came the whisper, "They're hiding something, Robert." It wasn't just a business concern anymore. Elena had begun to make mistakes, small ones at first, ignored regulations, skipped meetings with critical investors, signing off on deals without fully understanding the long-term impact. Mark, once a promising leader, now seemed overwhelmed, looking nervous in every boardroom meeting. I knew that feeling. It was the feeling I had when I was about to make a mistake, but couldn't stop myself. And I knew something much bigger was at stake. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they had won. But no one wins forever. Not like this. I waited in silence, observing, making plans in the shadows. I had built Titan, and now I was going to take it back. But not by force. No. This time, I would let the cracks form from within. I would watch them self-destruct, piece by piece, until they realized what they had truly lost. One day, I was invited to a closed-door meeting with Elena's team. They wanted my advice on a new project, something about expanding Titan's presence in a new sector. I smiled to myself. They still think I'm some washed up old man who can be swayed by a business offer. But I wasn't there for the project. I wasn't there to advise them. I was there to watch them fall apart, because I knew something they didn't. Elena's empire was about to crumble, and it wouldn't be from the outside. It would be from the inside, like sup, a poison they had been drinking for months without knowing it. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. And as I sat in that room, watching the faces of the people who once called me boss, I couldn't help but smile, because as they moved forward without me, I was preparing to bring them down, one mistake at a time. And the truth, it will come for them, slowly but surely. I didn't die. I was never the type of man to disappear and fade into obscurity. No, I simply chose to vanish from their world, to let Elena and Mark believe I was defeated, that I was gone for good. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that I was far from finished. I was rebuilding in the shadows, where they wouldn't find me. Helios Dynamics was born in secret, a phantom of a company that no one knew existed. For the first few months, I stayed in the background. I watched Titan's moves, observing their growing arrogance. Elena, now more confident than ever, strutted through the boardroom as if she had earned the throne. Mark, unsure of his footing, clung to his mother's coattails, hoping for validation that would never come. But I didn't want to take Titan head on. I didn't need to. I wanted to build something so much better, so much more dangerous, that their downfall would come naturally. I wasn't going to fight them directly. No, I was going to wait for them to make a mistake, and then take everything they had left. Helios was my shadow, a company that operated beneath the radar, employing ex-Titan engineers, former executives, and underpaid developers with nowhere else to go. I found the lost, the overlooked, the ones who were pushed aside by a company that had forgotten what it was built on. Hard work, loyalty, and innovation. They were my army, and we were ready to strike. For months, I built a quiet empire. We developed cutting-edge technology, something that could rival Titan's best offerings. I didn't rush it. I didn't need to. I focused on the details, the things Titan had neglected, small, yet critical things. I knew the market better than they did. I knew the weaknesses in their structure, and most importantly, I knew what their board of directors didn't. Elena's desperation for control. I started my own research division, focusing on AI and machine learning, the next big thing. Titan had dabbled in it, but they were behind, too busy with their new product lines that were poorly planned and executed. Meanwhile, Helios Dynamics was quietly winning contracts, building relationships, and most importantly, gaining market share. Every move Titan made, I anticipated it. Every time they expanded into a new market, I slipped in right behind them. They started losing clients to my company, but they didn't realize where the competition was coming from. No one knew that it was me. Not Elena, not Mark, not anyone. My company was a ghost, and every time Titan felt it, it was too late. The beauty of it was that Titan had no idea what was happening. I watched them scramble, watching their stock prices fluctuate with every move they made. And while they were busy celebrating their successes, I was there taking little pieces of their empire unnoticed. They didn't even realize they were slowly being drained until it was almost too late. The first real sign came when a major partner, one of Titan's oldest investors, pulled out of a contract with them and signed a deal with Helios. Elena tried to cover it up, claiming the loss was strategic. But deep down, I knew she felt the weight of it. That was the moment it started. That was when they knew. They just didn't know who their enemy was. By the time Titan figured it out, it was already too late. Helios had moved too fast, and the market was shifting. I wasn't just a competitor now. I was a force to be reckoned with, and I had only just begun. I could feel their desperation through the whispers I heard. Mark's phone calls became more frantic. Elena, always composed on the surface, was beginning to crack. She wasn't as confident anymore. She couldn't control what was slipping away from her. I knew this game. I knew how to play it. And now I was in control. Helios was more than just a company. It was a message that no one should ever underestimate me, no matter how far they pushed me. Titan had underestimated me, and now the shadow was rising, ready to take everything from them. and they still had no idea what was coming. Helios was working, and Titan had no idea. I watched them from the shadows, Elena, Mark, and the board of directors. They couldn't see what was happening. They couldn't feel the slow, steady bleed of their empire. Their arrogance had made them blind. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. It started small. A few lost clients here and there, a delay in delivery on some key projects, the occasional technical glitch that seemed to always hit at the worst times. Titan brushed it off. They couldn't connect the dots, but I knew. Every move they made, every mistake they made, was a victory for Helios. I was setting the stage, slowly and methodically. Then came the first major blow. Titan's stock price began to fall. Not dramatically, but enough to raise suspicions. Mark and Elena kept their cool on the surface, but I could feel the panic building inside them. It wasn't the kind of panic they could control with meetings or market forecasts. This was personal. They were beginning to realize they had an invisible enemy. They just didn't know who. The calls began. I knew because I had been listening. My people, planted deep in Titan circles, kept me informed. Elena was frantic, speaking in sharp, clipped tones. Mark was barely keeping it together. He couldn't understand what was happening. They were losing control, and they had no idea why. They couldn't fathom the truth. The enemy was right under their noses, and they were too blind to see it. I let them search. I let them look for the person who was pulling the strings. I knew they would find nothing. My team had covered our tracks too well. There were no traces of me in any of Helios's dealings, no link between the two companies. To the outside world, Helios was just another competitor. But to Titan, it was a phantom, a ghost they couldn't chase. But I knew. I knew the pressure would build until it became unbearable. Elena and Mark would start making mistakes, and when they did, I would be ready. The first mistake came when Elena, in a fit of frustration, ordered an internal investigation. She wanted to know who was behind the leaks, who had been feeding information to Helios, who had caused the first cracks in their armor. Her team dug deep and fast, looking for anything, any clue, any slip-up. I watched as they scoured through their contracts, their financials, their communications. What they didn't know was that I had left nothing for them to find. Every email, every contract, every piece of correspondence was carefully crafted to leave no trace. Helios had no fingerprints. And then came Mark's mistake. He made a call to an old friend of mine, someone who had worked with me in the past. Mark trusted him. He thought he could get information from him, something that would give him an edge, a way to expose Helios. What he didn't realize was that his old friend had been working for me the whole time. I had orchestrated everything. I controlled the flow of information. As soon as Mark's call ended, I knew everything was in place. They had no idea that the enemy they were chasing was someone they had already betrayed. The trap was set. I let the chaos play out. Titan's leadership crumbled under pressure. Their stock price continued to fall. Their reputation was damaged, bit by bit, until they were no longer the shining beacon of success they once were. And in the silence, I watched them spin their wheels, chasing shadows. Elena and Mark were desperate now, grasping at anything to keep their empire intact. But every move they made only pushed them closer to ruin. The betrayal they had once handed to me, the betrayal they thought would break me, had only led them to destroy themselves. I didn't need to strike a blow. I didn't need to attack them directly. My work was done, and they still had no idea who was behind it all. The truth, however, would come for them, slowly but surely. Mark had always been my pride. I had raised him with the belief that he would carry on my legacy, that one day, he would be the one to lead Titan, just as I had once done. But somewhere along the way, I lost him. Somewhere between the corporate dinners and the promotions, between my lessons on leadership and the stories I told him of what Titan meant to me, I lost my son. And in his place was a shadow, someone who would take everything from me without hesitation. But what they didn't understand, what Mark didn't understand, was that I knew exactly how to break him. I didn't need to tear him down with force. I didn't need to attack him with anger or hatred. No, I was going to break him slowly, piece by piece, until he felt the same betrayal I had felt, the same emptiness. I watched him closely from the shadows. I watched as he struggled to keep control of Titan, struggling to stand on his own without the crutch of his mother. I knew he wasn't ready. I knew he wasn't strong enough. But most importantly, I knew he had no idea who he was really up against. The first step in the game was to create doubt in his mind. I started small. Nothing that would raise alarms, nothing that would make him suspicious, just enough to make him question everything he thought he knew. I planted whispers in the right ears. A competitor would mention a new technology that Titan had missed, and Mark would look up from his phone, his brow furrowing. The smallest details, a missed call from an investor, a glitch in the new software Titan had been hyping up. All of it began to rattle him. He was already on edge, and I knew exactly how to make that feeling grow. It was all part of the plan. I needed him to feel vulnerable, to feel like everything he believed in was starting to crumble. I wanted him to doubt his decisions, to question his judgment, and with every little crack I made, I could see the shift. Mark was starting to unravel, but he didn't know where the thread was being pulled from. Then came the next step, the trap. I knew Mark had always admired his mother's control over Titan. She had been the face of the company, and Mark had learned to follow her lead. But the truth was, Elna had always been weaker than she let on. She had used Mark's insecurities to manipulate him into taking over, to make him think he was leading when, in reality, he was just a puppet. One day, I arranged a meeting between Mark and a key player from one of Titan's biggest investors. I knew this man well. He was a man who valued loyalty above all else. I told him to subtly suggest to Mark that he needed to make a tough decision about the future of Titan. Something drastic. Something that would shake him to his core. I wanted Mark to believe that he was at a crossroads, that the decisions he made now would define his future. What he didn't know was that I was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. I knew exactly how to manipulate him, how to make him feel as though he was drowning in responsibility, that he was trapped in a game where every move could lead to disaster. And then, as I had planned, Mark's insecurities took over. He started second-guessing every move, every decision. I could feel the shift when he came to me, asking for advice, seeking reassurance. The man who once believed he was destined to rule Titan was now questioning his place. I leaned in, and for the first time in years, I saw my son break in front of me. "Dad, I don't know if I can do this," he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of his failure. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this." I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. The son I had once been proud of, the one I thought could take the mantle of leadership, was now broken. His confidence had shattered, his sense of self crumbling under the weight of betrayal. My betrayal. "I never wanted this for you, Mark," I said, my voice low and heavy with unspoken truth. "But you need to understand something. Trust isn't given. It's earned. And you lost that a long time ago." I watched him sink into himself. The doubt was there, the fear, the realization that he wasn't the leader he thought he was, that I had manipulated him into believing he was. His face twisted in pain, but there was nothing left to say. I had broken him, and in that moment, I realized that my revenge wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about making Mark feel the same agony of betrayal I had felt. The same way Elena had torn me apart, I would tear him apart, piece by piece, until nothing was left but the shattered remnants of a man who had lost everything. He would understand. He would feel it, and he would never forget who made him suffer. The price of betrayal is never paid with time. It's paid with your soul. 5 years. 5 years since I walked away from everything. 5 years since I let them think they had won. Elena had taken my seat at Titan. Mark had inherited my company, my legacy, or so they thought. They believed they had driven me into the shadows, that I was nothing more than a forgotten relic of a bygone era. But they were wrong. I had waited long enough. It was time for them to face the truth, to realize who was really behind the cracks, the financial mishaps, and the slow, insidious collapse of their empire. It was time for them to see the face of the man who had been lurking in the shadows all these years, pulling the strings without their knowledge. And so, I made my move. It started with a phone call, just one. A simple message to Elena. "The board meeting, tomorrow. You might want to bring a chair for the founder." I knew it would rattle her. I knew the exact moment she'd receive the message. the panic in her eyes, the desperate calls to Mark. She had worked so hard to erase me from their history, to pretend that I had never existed, that my name was nothing more than a footnote in Titan's legacy. But it was time for that legacy to come crashing back into their lives. The next day, I entered the conference room just before the meeting was set to begin. The room fell into a stunned silence as I walked in. Elena was sitting at the head of the table, her face frozen, her smile forced. Mark was beside her, looking pale, his hands gripping the armrest of his chair like a man caught in a trap. The rest of the board members, the ones who had once sworn their allegiance to me, shifted uncomfortably, not knowing where to look. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning, the ticking of the clock on the wall, and then I broke the silence. "I think it's time we finally have a conversation," I said, my voice calm, controlled. There was no need for theatrics. The truth was more powerful than any show I could put on. Elena's eyes flickered, but she quickly masked her shock. "Robert, what is this? You can't just walk in here and—" I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "No, Elena, you don't get to control the narrative anymore. Not after everything you've done." I turned to Mark. His eyes were wide, filled with fear and confusion. "Mark, you're not a child anymore. You're supposed to be a leader. But look at you, Fab, scrambling, failing to hold this company together. This was never your company to take. You didn't earn it." Mark opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The guilt was too heavy, the weight of the truth suffocating him. Elena's composure faltered for just a second. "What is this? What do you want from us, Robert?" Her voice shook now, no longer the confident leader she once was. "You left. You disappeared. Why come back now?" I walked slowly to the head of the table, standing where Elena used to sit, where I used to sit. I placed both hands on the edge of the table, looking at them all, one by one. "I didn't disappear," I said quietly. I waited. I waited for the right moment. You see, when you think you've killed someone's legacy, when you think you've erased them from history, you don't realize that all you've done is make them more dangerous. I let that hang in the air for a moment. They were all listening now, every ear in that room fixed on me. I could see the fear in their eyes. "You thought you took my company from me," I continued. "But I didn't need Titan to have power. I built something better, something you didn't even see coming. Helios Dynamics." The words hit like a slap. Elena's face turned white, and Mark's jaw clenched. The room was tense, like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. "You've been chasing shadows," I said. "Helios wasn't just a competitor. It was my revenge, and you never knew it." Mark stood up suddenly, his voice rising in anger. "No, you don't get to come in here and destroy everything we've built. You don't get to do this to us." I turned to face him, my expression unreadable. "What you've built? You mean what I built? What I gave you? You're welcome to keep the seat at the table, Mark. But don't forget who put you there." Elena finally stood, her voice trembling. "You were never meant to lead again, Robert. We were doing what was best for Titan." I shook my head slowly, a dark smile forming on my lips. "What's best for Titan? You think that's what you're doing? No, Elena, you are running it into the ground. I gave you everything. I made you who you are. And this is how you repay me?" I paused, letting the silence fill the room. The power had shifted. It was no longer theirs. And now, it's time to face the consequences. I turned toward the door, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. I had returned, and the world, their world, would never be the same. The room was silent, the tension palpable as Robert stood at the head of the conference table, holding the damning evidence in his hands. His calm demeanor, the coolness in his voice made the truth even more terrifying. He had been waiting for this moment for 5 long years, and now the tables had finally turned. Elena and Mark sat there, frozen. They had no idea how to react. Or perhaps they knew exactly what was coming. The veneer of their success, their carefully constructed world of lies, was about to shatter. And Robert, their once helpless victim, was the one who would expose it all. "You thought you could get away with it," Robert said slowly, his voice cutting through the tension. "You thought that by destroying me, you could take Titan for yourselves, that you could erase me from history. But here I am. Elena's face turned pale, her jaw tightening. Mark sat with his hands clenched into fists, his eyes darting nervously between his father and the documents in Robert's hands. The room was heavy with the weight of betrayal, but it wasn't just their betrayal of him. No, it was their betrayal of the entire company, the people who trusted them, and themselves. Robert slammed the folder onto the table, the sound like thunder in the room. "This," he said, pointing to the documents, "is the truth you've been hiding. Financial fraud, fake reports. You thought no one would notice, but you were wrong. You thought you could wipe the slate clean and build your empire on a foundation of lies. But now, it's all here." He flipped open the folder, revealing page after page of manipulated financial statements, doctored reports, and money laundering schemes that Elena had orchestrated, with Mark's signature on every falsified document. The weight of their deceit hung in the air like a thick fog. "Mark," Robert said, his voice cold, "you were supposed to be my successor. I trusted you. I taught you everything. And this is what you've done with it? You've been covering up for your mother, running Titan into the ground." Mark's face turned red with shame, but he didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Elena, too, sat in stunned silence. Her carefully cultivated facade of the perfect CEO, the loving mother and wife, was crumbling. But Robert wasn't finished. He pulled out another document. "And this," he said, his fingers shaking as he slid it across the table, "this is the final nail in your coffin." It was a transfer agreement, signed by Elena and Mark, transferring the ownership of Titan Global to a shell company. But that wasn't the shocking part. The agreement had been made months ago, long before Robert ever set foot back in the building. They had planned to sell Titan without a second thought, to make a profit off their betrayal. Elena's breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. You can't." "I don't need to call the police, Elena," Robert said, his voice calm, almost bored. "You've already done enough to destroy yourselves. I don't need to watch you go to prison. I just need you to see what you've done. I need you to understand the weight of your betrayal." He leaned forward, locking eyes with them both. "And the price of that betrayal? It's not jail time. It's not public disgrace. No, the price of betrayal is losing everything. Everything." Elena and Mark stared at him, horrified. But Robert wasn't done. With a final, deliberate motion, he slid a new contract across the table. It was the transfer of Titan's ownership to a new entity. But this time, the price was shocking. "I'm selling Titan back to you," he said, his lips curling into a faint, almost amused smile. "For $1. "What?" Elena choked out, barely able to process the words. You can't just do that." "Oh, I can," Robert replied, his voice tinged with cold satisfaction. "Because I don't need this company anymore. You do. And when you take it, you'll realize the cost of what you've done. You'll carry the burden of your lies, your greed, for the rest of your lives." He stood, walking slowly toward the door. He didn't look back. "Enjoy your empire, Elena. Mark, it's all yours." As Robert left the room, the weight of his words hung in the air like a suffocating fog. They had thought they had won. They had thought they had erased him. But in the end, it was they who were left with nothing. The true cost of betrayal wasn't just the destruction of others. It was the destruction of themselves. And they would never be able to escape it. Elena's arrest wasn't a moment of triumph. The police came in the middle of the night. They didn't need to say much. She had already known what was coming. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just stood there, silent, as they handcuffed her and led her away. There was no resistance. Her world, built on lies and greed, had collapsed in an instant. But I didn't feel the rush of satisfaction that most people would expect. I didn't feel the joy of seeing her pay for everything she had done to me, to the company, to our family. No, all I felt was a quiet emptiness. Mark was gone by then. The minute Elena was arrested, he disappeared. No calls, no texts, no trace of him. He ran, just like I knew he would. I had expected it, of course. A A coward always runs when the walls start closing in. But there was no victory in that either. Just a faint, bitter taste of what could have been. I sat in my office at Titan, the place I had built from the ground up. The chairs were empty now. The desk was cold. The boardroom was silent. The echo of footsteps that had once filled these halls was gone. I didn't have the energy to stand and look out the window at the skyline I had once ruled over. The place, the company, the empire. It didn't matter anymore. I had won. I had taken everything back. But in the end, it felt hollow. The price of betrayal had been paid, but I was left with nothing but the ruins of what was once mine. Justice doesn't need to rush, I muttered to myself, staring out at the city. I had always been patient, and that patience had been my strength. I had waited for the right moment to strike, to let them destroy themselves. They had done all the work for me. They had been their own executioners. But even now, as I looked at the wreckage they had left behind, I didn't feel the thrill of retribution. I didn't feel vindicated. There was no joy in watching them fall, only the stark reality that all of this, everything I had fought for, was gone. I had destroyed my own family to achieve it. Is this the price of betrayal? I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. The sound of sirens in the distance echoed through the empty office, but it wasn't the sound of victory. It was the sound of something much quieter, the final toll of a life spent in the shadows. I had paid the price for justice, but in the end, there was no reward, no peace, no satisfaction. I had taken back everything they had stolen from me, but in doing so, I had lost the one thing that mattered most, and now I am left with nothing but the silence of my own making.